Today's quote is from St. Alphonsus Liguori on prayer. "Whoever prays is certainly saved. He who does not is certainly damned. All the blessed have been saved by prayer. All the damned have been lost through not praying. If they had prayed, they would not have been lost. And this is and will be their greatest torment in hell. To think how easily they might have been saved just by asking God for His grace, but that now it is too late. Their time of prayer is gone." I've got two stories today that are really amazing Catholic legends. Legends and stories like these give Catholics a strong backbone in the faith. They transmit truths like Aesop's fables. The documentation and proof seem irrelevant to me, even though many of them clearly happened. It's funny how people say to me, "Oh, those Catholic stories probably weren't true. What do you even get out of them anyway?" And then they go and read some fantasy book or something. It's just really funny. The first story was told to me by a friend who had got it from a priest, and he later found the story retold in a 1928 edition of Ave Maria magazine. The second is from the famous Golden Legend. It's a series of stories compiled by the famous Jacobus de Varenne. This book was really popular in the Middle Ages, and the fact that we're still reading it today shows that these stories survived the test of time. Story 1. The Boy with the Golden Hair. In an ancestral castle in Germany, a priest was offering Mass in the private chapel on the feast of Corpus Christi. A band of marauding soldiers broke in, slew the priest, and made off with the sacred vessels. At least, so it was thought. Shortly afterward, the sweet little boy began to appear in the castle halls. He had golden hair, bright, beautiful eyes, and was dressed in a long white robe fastened at the waist. His smile was kind and gentle, but he never spoke. Who was this boy? When another lad inquired his name, the stranger merely pointed to a hallway near the chapel. Another youngster wanted to force the stranger to speak, but he disappeared into thin air. Nobody could solve the mystery. One Christmas Eve, the sweet little boy appeared to a group of young men in the castle's dining hall. When they asked him to tell what he wanted, the lad beckoned them to follow. He led the group to a confessional on whose wall was a wood carving of some grapes. The boy put his hand on the grapes and disappeared. After much pressing and fumbling, the young men found a secret door which led down a pitch-black stairway. Down the steps they hurried, lighting the way with only a candle, to be met by another heavy door locked with a heavy latch. A strange feeling of reverence and awe came over them, as though they were on holy ground. Pushing it open, they beheld a startling scene. In the center, emitting 1,000 brilliant rays in the light of their candle, stood a golden monstrance, and through its crystal center gleamed the pure white of a sacred host. Near the monstrance, on the same shelf, was a ciborium covered with silk. Kneeling before the Blessed Sacrament was the mummified form of a boy with golden hair, dressed in a long white robe. The sweet little boy! He looked just like the lad who had been appearing in the castle. In his hand was a roughly written note, yellowed with time. "Look," one of the young men cried, as they stood in awe. "Something is written here." And this is what they read. "I, Michael Holzbauer, altar boy of the castle chapel, carried the monstrance and ciborium with the Blessed Sacrament to this hidden room to save it when the soldiers struck the holy priest down. But in the darkness, I pushed against the secret door in the confessional, and the lock snapped into place and locked me in. Now I must die, but God be praised that the soldiers did not get the Blessed Sacrament. I will therefore die gladly and without complaints. Pray for me when I am found. A.D. 1627, on the Feast of Corpus Christi." Story 2. The Seven Sleepers. The Seven Sleepers were natives of the city of Ephesus. The Emperor Decius, who decreed the persecution of Christians, came to Ephesus and gave orders to build temples in the center of the city, so that all the people might join him in worshiping the false gods. He further ordered that all Christians were to be rounded up and put in chains, either to sacrifice to the gods or to die, and the Christians in Ephesus were so afraid of the threatened punishments that friends betrayed friends, fathers their sons, and sons their fathers. In the city there were 7 young Christian men named Maximianus, Malchus, Mercianus, Dionysius, Johannes, Serapion, and Constantinus, who were sorely distressed about what was happening among the Christian faithful. The 7 held high rank in the palace, but refused to sacrifice to the idols. Instead, they hid in their houses and devoted themselves to fasting and prayer. For this they were denounced and brought before Decius. They affirmed their Christian faith, but the emperor gave them time to come to their senses before he came back to the city. On the contrary, they distributed their wealth to the poor, and by common consent withdrew to Mount Celion and kept out of sight there. They lived that way for a long time, while Malchus, one of their number, took it upon himself to provide for their needs. Whenever he had to go into the city for supplies, he put on the dress and appearance of a beggar. Decius in time returned to Ephesus and commanded that the 7 be sought out and forced to sacrifice. Malchus was alarmed when he heard this in the city and reported the emperor's will to his friends. This aroused their fears, but Malchus set before them the food he had brought to give them strength to face the coming trials. After they had eaten and were talking together with sighs and tears, they suddenly, by the will of God, fell asleep. The next morning the search was on, but they couldn't be found, and Decius was disturbed at the loss of such fine young men. Then they were denounced for concealing themselves on Mount Celion, and moreover, for giving their property to the Christian poor and persisting in the adherence to the faith. Decius therefore ordered their parents to appear before him and threatened them with death unless they told all they knew regarding their son's whereabouts. The parents instead repeated the same charges against the youths and complained that their wealth had been given away to the poor. The emperor thought about what he ought to do to the 7 and decided by the will of God to have the cave in which they were hiding walled up with stones, so that, thus immured, they would die of hunger and need. This was done, but 2 Christians, Theodorus and Rufinus, wrote an account of the martyrdom and left it concealed among the stones that closed the cave. 372 years later, long after Decius and his whole generation had passed away, in the 13th year of the reign of the Emperor Theodosius, there was an outbreak of heresy and widespread denial of the resurrection of the dead. This deeply aggrieved the most Christian emperor, who, seeing how the true faith was so impiously distorted, sat day after day in an inside room of his palace, wearing a hair shirt and weeping inconsolably. God in his mercy saw this, and wishing to assuage the grief of those who mourned and to confirm their faith in the resurrection of the dead, opened the treasury of his loving kindness and awakened the aforesaid martyrs. He inspired a certain citizen of Ephesus to build a shelter for his shepherders on Mount Celion, and to do this the masons took away the stones from the mouth of the cave, and thus awakened the saints. They greeted each other, thinking that they had simply slept through the night. Then they remembered their sadness of the day before and questioned Malchus about Decius's decision concerning them. He answered as he had on the previous evening. "They're looking for us to make a sacrifice to the idols. That's what the emperor has in mind for us." "And God knows," Maximianus responded, "we will not offer sacrifice." Having encouraged his companions, he asked Malchus to go down to the city and buy more loaves than he had the day before. Taking 5 coins with him, Malchus left the cave. He wondered for a moment about the stones lying around, but having other things on his mind, thought no more about it. He approached the city cautiously and marveled at seeing a cross over the gate. Going to another gate and another, he was dumbfounded at the sight of a cross over each of them and at the different appearance of the city itself. He crossed himself and returned to the first gate, thinking that he must be dreaming. But gathering his wits and covering his face, he went in. When he came to the bread sellers, he heard people talking about Christ, and was more and more bewildered. "What's going on?" he thought. "Yesterday no one dared to utter the name of Christ, and today everybody confesses him. I don't think I'm in Ephesus at all, because the city looks different, but I don't know any other city like this." He asked someone, and was assured that he was in Ephesus, but kept thinking that there was some mistake, and that he had better go back to his companions. First, however, he went to buy bread, but when he offered his money, the sellers, surprised, told each other that this youth had found some ancient treasure. Seeing them talking about him, Malchus thought that they were getting ready to turn him over to the emperor, and, more frightened than ever, asked them to let him go and told him to keep the bread and the money. But they laid hold of him and said, "Where are you from? Tell us where you found these coins of the old emperors, and we'll share it with you and hide you." Malchus was so frightened that he could find nothing to say to them, and the men, seeing that he would not answer, put a rope around his neck and led him through the streets to the middle of town. Meanwhile, the rumor spread that this young man had discovered a treasure. Crowds gathered round and gaped at him. He wanted to convince them that he had not found anything, and looked all around him, hoping that someone would recognize him, or he would see some of his relatives, but no such thing happened, and he stood there like one demented in the middle of the crowd. Word of this reached St. Martin the bishop and Antipater the proconsul, a recent arrival in the city. They ordered the citizens to be careful and to bring the youth and his money to them. When he was hauled along to the church, he thought he was being brought to the emperor. The bishop and the proconsul, amazed when they saw the coins, asked him where he had found this unknown treasure. He answered that he had not found anything at all, but had taken the money out of his parents' purse. They asked him what city he came from, and he replied, "I am sure I belong to this city. If indeed this is the city of the Ephesians, get your parents here to vouch for you," the council said. But when Malchus gave their names, they said he was pretending to be someone else in order to escape. "How can we believe you?" the proconsul asked, "when you say the money belonged to your parents? The inscription on the coins is more than 370 years old. They go back to the first days of the Emperor Decius, and are not at all like our coinage. How can your parents be that old, and you so young? You're just trying to fool the wise men and elders of Ephesus. Therefore I order you to be held until you confess what you found." Malchus then threw himself at their feet and said, "In God's name, my lords, tell me what I asked you, and I will tell you all I have in my heart. The Emperor Decius was here in this city. Where is he now?" The bishop answered, "My son, today there is nobody on earth who is called Decius, but there was an Emperor Decius long, long ago." "My lord," Malchus replied, "what you say leaves me confused, and no one believes what I say. But come with me, and I will show you my friends who are with me on Mount Celion, and believe them. For I know this, that we fled from the face of the Emperor Decius, and yesterday evening I saw the emperor come into this city, if this is the city of Ephesus." The bishop thought this over, then told the proconsul that God was trying to make them see something through this youth, so they set out with him, and a great crowd followed them. Malchus went ahead to alert his friends, and the bishop came after him, and found among the stones the letter sealed with 2 silver seals. He called the people together, and read the letter to them. They marveled at what they had heard, and seeing the 7 saints of God, their faces like roses in bloom, sitting in the cave, all fell to their knees and gave glory to God. Now the bishop and the proconsul sent word to the emperor Theodosius, bidding him to come quickly to see this new miracle. He rose at once, laid aside the sackcloth in which he had been grieving, and glorifying God, hurried from Constantinople to Ephesus. All the people went out to meet him, and together they went up to the cave. The minute the saints saw the emperor, their faces shone like the sun. The emperor prostrated himself before them and gave praise to God, then rose and embraced each one and wept over them, saying, "Seeing you thus, it is as if I saw the Lord raising Lazarus from the dead." St. Maximianus said to him, "Believe us, it is for your sake that God has raised us before the day of the great resurrection, so that you may believe without the shadow of a doubt in the resurrection of the dead. We have truly risen and are alive, and as an infant is in his mother's womb and lives feeling no pain, so were we living lying here asleep, feeling nothing." Then, while all looked on, the 7 saints bowed their heads to the ground, fell asleep, and yielded up their spirits as God willed that they should do. The emperor rose and bent over them, weeping and kissing them, and ordered golden coffins to be made for them. That very night, however, they appeared to Theodosius, and said that as hitherto they had lain in the earth and had risen from the earth, so he should return them to the earth until the Lord raised them up again. Therefore, the emperor ordered the cave to be embellished with gilded stones, and also decreed that all the bishops who now professed the faith in the resurrection should be absolved. There is reason to doubt that these saints slept for 372 years, because they arose in the year of our Lord 448. Decius reigned in 252, and his reign lasted only 15 months, so the saints must have slept only 195 years. Now, if that isn't a marvelous story, I don't know what is. Thank you all so much for listening, and keep in mind we're on iTunes and SoundCloud, and also on YouTube. Godspeed.